The Supreme Court had a big day yesterday. First, if you want to look at my last video, check out when I think about the Texas State Attorney General suing the other states for their election issues. And this one is one that the Supreme Court just recently denied, coming out of Pennsylvania, about Act 77. All right, so let's get some background here. The issue is that there's an act called Act 77 that was passed by the legislature in Pennsylvania, signed into law. This act essentially allowed universal mail-in voting because of the pandemic. So it's called Act 77. This seemed to conflict with the Pennsylvania state constitution because the Constitution allowed mail-in voting, which was really an absentee method of mail-in voting, but for four very specific reasons. If your occupation or business took you outside the state, if you were ill or had a disability, if you had observance of a religious holiday, for instance, that you couldn't vote, if you were working at, let's say, a polling place somewhere in the state, and those duties didn't allow you to actually go physically vote. The PA Constitution allows you to vote by mail if you fell into one of those four categories. Well, the first legal question was, well, if the Constitution only allows four ways to exercise mail-in voting, and you don't amend the Constitution, but just create a statute and said, okay, we're going to allow universal mail-in voting, does that law now conflict with the Pennsylvania Constitution? Because it's more or less extending the rights, right? It's saying, well, not only you can mail in your vote for these four reasons, but you can also mail in your vote for any other reason we choose, which is universal mail-in voting. So you don't have to have one of the excuses. If you have one of the excuses, you can still do it, but you don't have to have one of the excuses. So the legal question is it an only, where the Constitution says these are the only ways you can mail in your vote if you have one of these four excuses? Or here are four ways that you must do it, but if your state legislature wants to add on other means or methods, then they can do it that way too, right? It's not a limiting principle. It's not these four only, but it's these four must, and you can do whatever. Now, you'll hear this concept in law school called the ceiling but not the floor. In other words, like the Constitution. The Constitution is known as the floor. There's a certain amount of rights that you have to have. But if the states or any other municipality wants to give you more rights, right? So an example of that would be, let's say the federal Constitution, it gives you the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the core freedoms from, let's say, the First Amendment. And then a state says, well, we're going to add some more freedoms to that list, right? You got those, but we're going to add something, freedom to eat a sandwich, for instance. And you have the freedom to do whatever, any other freedom they choose to add, right? In the state constitution. You start here and you can build your way up. So in this case, it's really, is it the floor or is it the ceiling, right? What I mean by the ceiling, is it these are the only ways you can do it, or is these are the mandated four ways you must do it and you can add on? So that's the core legal question here. So the first thing is you want to think about is, well, who can interpret this state law and the state constitution? Well, it's the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court is the final say in what state law means. Even the federal courts can't overrule the state court's interpretation of state law. So the state court said, well, hey, it's the floor. These are the core four that you have to have, but you can add on whatever, if you want to add on universal, you can, but you have to do it. And so Act 77 is good. They interpreted Act 77 to comply with the Pennsylvania Constitution. So then it went up to the Supreme Court the first time. So when it went up to the Supreme Court the first time, there was a 4-4 split because the argument was that in choosing electors, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, method of selecting electors, it says, quote, each state shall appoint in such matter as the legislature therefore may direct. So we're talking about the state legislature. And the argument was, well, this is the courts saying that it's okay to expand mail-in voting. But it's really the legislature's job to expand mail-in voting. So the court was split 4-4 and saying, well, does legislature mean only the legislature? Or can the courts, do they have a role? Now, generally, what happens is the legislature, when they make a law, Who interprets that law? Well, it's the state Supreme Court. The courts interpret the law. The legislature writes the law. Even in the most generous interpretation of the word legislature in the clause, you would still have to understand the court's interpretation of what the legislature passed is what the law is, right? How do you know what the law means? It's the state Supreme Court who tells you what the law means. So even though here it says legislature, they exercise that authority by passing laws. And when they pass a law, it's the courts who interpret the laws, the courts of that state. So that was sent back down in a 4-4 because they, a couple of the people in the Supreme Court, were getting textualists with legislature. What does that mean? Does it only mean legislature? Okay, it's a 4-4. So it was 4-4 and went back down. It goes back up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Now, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is the final arbiter of all law that is passed within Pennsylvania under the state constitution that doesn't invoke federal law. That's what you got. So, the state Supreme Court said, this case is nonsense, right? This case is nonsense. The reason why this case is nonsense, it's because of latches. Now, essentially what they're saying is that you should have brought this case earlier. This law was passed in 2019. You knew this was going to be a problem back then, right? The facts didn't change. Everything about this law and the rise of the cause of action didn't change. You knew that they were doing this based on a statute. They weren't making a constitutional amendment. And these issues came up back then, and you could have easily just sued back then and said, hey, this is illegal. And it could have gone through the courts. And by waiting till after the election and seemingly after your guy lost to bring this up, so they said, well, since you wanted to play this game of waiting till after to see if your guy loses before you brought this lawsuit, then essentially you're shit out of luck, right? You gambled and you're lost. So tough luck. So the plaintiff said, well, hey, you know what? State Supreme Court, we don't agree. We're going to ask the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn your interpretation of state law and state law procedures because we believe you're wrong. And the Supreme Court came forward, and this is what they wrote. This is what they wrote, and this was their opinion. So the Supreme Court, understanding that this is a state law issue, that the state Supreme Court is the final arbiter of state law, that they've said that procedurally this case is dismissed with prejudice because of the latches issue. Essentially what they're asking the federal Supreme Court is, we want you guys to reinterpret state law and throw out all these ballots, or just say the election was no good and that the state legislature should pick the electors, right? And the state legislature happens to be Republicans. The Republican Party pick electors for Trump, and Trump wins. So, good. So the Supreme Court, having this case now brought in front of them, puts out one of the shortest opinions I think anybody's going to ever read. And this is what they said. And this is when you know that they're tired of the bullshit. They write, the application for injunctive relief presented to Justice Alito and referred to him by the court is denied. Nothing more, nothing less. Just one sentence. One sentence to tell you that this whole case was bullshit. The whole thing was bullshit. And this is the Supreme Court just more or less saying, get this bullshit out of here. Get this bullshit out of here. That's it. You don't even get more than a sentence. You don't get more than a goddamn sentence. That's how much you're wasting our fucking time. Call it what it is. That's what happened. And you guys know I'm not. I'm more of a libertarian in my thinking. I lean conservative on some issues, but I do lean liberal on other issues. Like, for instance, Medicare for all, I'm for. Second Amendment rights, I'm strongly for second. So I'm a Second Amendment guy. I just got I forgot. I should have showed you guys. I just got my new. I'm a member of the NRA. For those of you who don't know, so I just got my new bag with the NRA. I'm strong. I'm an NRA member, so that's not going to go over well with some of you lefties. But hey, what can I say? I'm a Second Amendment guy. I was watching Amazing Lucas yesterday, and he was going over it, and he was going over like the affidavits. it's like it goes from It started from Sharpie Gate, where you had affidavits of people saying lies, and it got to the point where people were putting so much faith in people just making up stuff in affidavits and saying, "Oh, we got an affidavit from somebody who said that they saw space aliens destroying ballots in the back," and people are like, "Oh yeah, we have an affidavit, so that means throw out millions of ballots." These are ridiculous arguments, and people are taking them seriously, and it's sad because there are creators out here who are afraid to tell you guys the truth, to tell you guys that most of these lawsuits are just bullshit, right? Because they know if they were to tell you guys the truth, they would lose tens of thousands of subscribers. Lucas lost 12,000 subscribers because he said that there's been no evidence, that he could find no evidence. I'm expecting to lose some of you guys too. Why? Because when you speak truth to power, when you say, well, listen, I've not seen any evidence, right? I've not seen any credible evidence that will overturn this election. I can show you credible evidence from 4 years ago when President Trump won. Here's one right here, right? There were more votes than voters in Detroit. And President Trump won Michigan, right? So in Michigan, in the county of Michigan, there were more votes than voters. President Trump actually got more votes in that county, but no one was screaming election fraud then. If you took Michigan and flipped it to Hillary Clinton, she would still lose the election. So nobody was screaming voter fraud, but there was an actual problem. That's actual evidence right there. Here's actual evidence. There were more votes than voters. If you could point to something like that, then you got it, right? Then you got something. But I've seen nothing even close to that. Matter of fact, I've only seen garbage. And it is so dangerous now. This is the dangerous part. A president can say, if I win, it's legitimate. And if I lose, it was rigged. That's as close to fascism as you're going to get, right? If I lose, it's rigged, but if I win, it's legit. That's the only argument that's coming out right now. I've lost the election, so it's rigged. Now, if you think I'm wrong, please let me know. Let me know in the comment section. Let me know if you think I am wrong. When I do my videos, I try to look at both sides dispassionately. That's why a lot of you may be here from the Breonna Taylor video and a lot of my police videos. Why? Because as someone who is liberal, right, in certain aspects, like I was saying for universal health care and things of that nature, and conservative on some aspects, Second Amendment and, big government. I want smaller government, not bigger government. You understand that I'm going to give both sides fair hearing. And with Breonna Taylor, at first I'm like, my God, this woman is shot in her apartment while she was sleeping. And they were at the wrong address. You peel back the onion and you find they were at the right address. She wasn't asleep in her bed. There was a whole lot of stuff. They were at the right address. Matter of fact, it was listed on a warrant. Those type of things. And it's wild because when liberals watch that video, they say I've sold out. And when Republicans watch that video, they say it's fact-based. But now I believe this video, for instance, about the election is going to be reversed. And there's one last thing that I need to mention. There are extremes on both sides. And one of the most extreme things that I've seen coming out of this whole election mess is that one side says there's absolutely no fraud in this election, right? They'll say there's absolutely no fraud, no evidence of any fraud anywhere. And that's misleading, right? There is evidence of election fraud, right? There's one guy who voted for grandma who wasn't supposed to vote, right? There's going to be some evidence, right? You got 150 million votes, so somebody's going to do something fishy. Yes, no doubt about it. So that is an understatement. And then on the other side, they want to make it seem like any fraud that is found should throw out millions of votes. So in the situation where Junior votes for grandma and he's not supposed to, they want to make it seem like that one instance of one vote being fraudulent is enough to throw out the whole election. But thank God the courts are not that stupid. The courts make it very clear that, yes, there is going to be election fraud, but it is on the person who's alleging the election fraud to show that it's systemic enough, it's widespread enough, where it can overturn the outcome of the election. So let's say, for instance, in Georgia, where they've recounted the votes twice, they found nothing that would be even remotely enough to overturn the election. Not even remotely. And these are Republicans. These aren't Democrats. The Republican Trump supporting governor of Georgia is not in the tank against Trump. And I think it's hard for Republicans to reconcile that a Republican governor who is not corrupt, where's it going to end? Is it really that tough to just say we lost? Like Jeff Kemp, the Republican governor, the one that Trump has endorsed many times, the person who Republicans cheered when he won, right? Because he won over Stacey Abrams. He saved Georgia from becoming a blue state. He says he's voting for Trump. And this guy is the one that you believe would destroy his career so Joe Biden can win the presidency? That's the logic that's being brought out here. Now, if you agree with it, God bless you. But I think it's bullshit. Let me know how you feel in the comments section. Do you think I'm just full of shit? Do you think this is nonsense? I can only promise you a couple of things. Number one, if you come here, I'm going to give it to you straight, cold, unapologetic. If you can deal with it, fine. If you can't, I understand. So if we're going to get into this tonight with me and Uncivil Law on our show Uncivilized, tonight at 9 o'clock on his channel. And tomorrow I'm going to be on with Viva and Barnes, and we're going to talk about it Thursday. And it's just going to be, it's going to be what it is. And if you agree with me, that's fine. And if you don't, it's okay. But it's having a conversation. And I enjoy the conversation. Thanks for watching. And hopefully I'll either see you tonight or tomorrow. Peace.